Friends, it's good to be back here again. It's been a few years since I was last here, but it's been an interesting drive down. I've seen most of the seasons this day already, so got quite a bit of rains on me. I wish the van was a bit cleaner, but I parked it around the back, so you don't have to see that. But tonight I'm talking about an interesting topic. I've not done this presentation for a while now, dynamic dinosaurs, and so we're going to do bit of biblical thinking about the dinosaurs. So normally with these kind of talks, I like to do a bit of an intro slide to give you an idea where we're coming from and why we're doing these presentations. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with CMI, but I'll say a little bit more in a moment. But we have people write in to our ministry, and Robert from Australia wrote in, and I can sympathize with him. Because he said, I used to avoid conversations where dinosaurs, God, and creation were debated within the secular sphere at work. So he used to avoid them, but then something happened. He connected with literature, so it was refuting evolution, the Creation magazine, and now, he says, I look for opportunities to be part of them. And I think for many, maybe not all, but for many, having a bit of understanding of God's creation in a world where we're bombarded with evolution all the time gives us a bit more comfort or a bit more passion to talk about the Creator, who is also the Savior. So I'll say a little bit more about our ministry. For those who don't know, Creation Ministries International is really an information providing a ministry predominantly to the church. So we go speaking at churches mostly, but we welcome people who are not of the Christian faith, of course, to maybe challenge them in their worldview and encourage brothers and sisters. And because we don't come back every week or even every month or even every year, we'd like to connect with people, and there's different ways to do that. One way is the info bites, which you see a picture here. So this is a free email newsletter that gives you about one email a week on average. I know people's inboxes are overflowing as it is, but if you're not connected and you think, creation, I'd like to hear from them a bit more, and you can just click delete, or after a few weeks, click unsubscribe if it's too much. But yeah, put your name down and your email. You don't have to. So whatever you do, pass the clipboard around, and I'll find them later at the end, at the back somewhere there. Oh, there goes the sheet flying. I'll pick it up on my way back. So please feel free to put your name or not, your choice. Thank you very much. So as they go around the houses, I'm going to continue with the talk now. I want to start thinking about how to think about dinosaurs and dynamic. What are they dynamic? Can they run really fast? Perhaps you've seen this movie. This scene looks familiar to you. That's, of course, an ancient movie now. I'm not going to say it's millions of years old, but it does go back a couple of years. Jurassic Park, they've done a whole slew of franchise and stuff. I'm not going to talk about their aerodynamics or how quickly they could run, just in case you know the T-Rex could reach 40 kilometers per hour. But let's think biblically about dinosaurs and what they mean to us. This is a picture that is the Chinese zodiac. So on it you see 12 creatures. Most of them we are very familiar with, and we could readily identify or even encounter, be it on the street, on a farm, or in a zoo perhaps. And so that's all classic. But there's one exception that is a bit more standing out, and that's the one at the bottom. What on earth is that? Because the tiger, the rabbit, ox, all these animals are known to us nowadays, but dragons? Isn't that like a mythical creature? Dragons of legend. Now, we at CMI and other creationist organizations, we think that the word dragons is actually referring to the dinosaurs of history. So it's two words pointing or describing the same creature. And in case you didn't know, dinosaurs is Greek and it stands for terrible lizards. So that maybe explains my subtitle, Legendary Lizards. But we're talking about dinosaurs, and although we think they're the same as dragons, let's have a look at this fossil. So this is a set of fossilized teeth, and you have two people depicted here, and they both look at the same thing. And one of them thinks, oh, I think that probably could belong to a meat eater. And the other person thinks, well, I think it could very well be a plant eater. The question is, can you tell from a set of fossilized teeth what something ate? Certainly, well, years ago. Some people, many people would think dinosaurs, millions of years, we would put them a lot more recent. But let's look at other animals that we do know much about. So the giant panda, its favorite diet, bamboo. It is classed, if you categorize animals, under the carnivores, but its main diet tends to be carnivores. But if you look at those teeth, some people might say, surely those teeth look so sharp and pointy, they must be for ripping meat in other animals. Well, is it now? Let's look at this skull. This skull has similar pointy, sharp teeth, and you might think, well, that definitely has to be a meat eater. Well, this is the skull of what we call a flying fox, but colloquially also called a fruit bat. Now, what does a fruit bat eat? There's a clue in the name. It tends to eat a lot of fruit. So just because something has big and sharp teeth, it doesn't necessarily mean meat eater. It can do, but you can't make that up unless you can observe the creature. And observations, that's an important thing to talk about before we dive into some more of the other stuff. As you can see here, too many people think this battle about evolution and creation is about sorting out the different evidences. And the evidences in this picture are depicted by cards. And you have two gents, each with their own wheelbarrow. One represents an evolutionary view, the other a creation view, and they put cards in their respective wheelbarrows. And people think like, well, as long as you got more evidence than the other view, then at the end you just tally up the numbers, and whoever has the most evidences, they're the winner and they're right. Is that how it works? Well, no, absolutely not. Of course not. If you look closely, the ball that they are getting the evidence from symbolically represents planet Earth, or at least the southern hemisphere. And irrespective of what your worldview is, the fact of the matter is we all have the same evidence, the same facts, the same data. Now, okay, granted, we might not know what they do in some obscure lab in some faraway country per se, but it is true that if you dig up a dinosaur fossil bone, you can have evolutionists bear upon it, and you can have creationists bear upon it, and they can come to different conclusions. Even though the bone of the fossil is exactly the same, they can all measure it, tape measure or something fancier, put it on a scale, or if they have some money and some fancy lab access, they can analyze it with some fancy machine. That can all be done in the present, and you can make measurements and you can compare notes. But the debate about evolution and creation is not so much about the here and the now, it's about the past. How did this fossil came to be? What was the dinosaur doing when it died? Did it have children? What was it eating? Where did it live? How did it die? And did it die here, or was it transported here? These are all questions that have to do with things that are not repeatable, not observable anymore. And God challenged Job in chapter 38, verse 4. Were you there, or where were you when I laid down the foundations? And the Christian, the creationist, has to admit, well, I wasn't there. But the evolutionist has to be honest, they weren't there either. But we do have somebody who was there, who is an eyewitness, who is reliable and doesn't lie and knows everything. So when it comes to the debate about creation and evolution, it's not about the evidence or the facts or the data. It's about worldview. It's about how you see these things and how they came to be. And we liken that often in our ministries, wearing a set of glasses or lenses. If I were to put on a set of glasses that had pink lenses in it, then you would all look very pink. And so would the building and the curtains and everything else. But if you were to put on green glasses, same, everything turns green. And so the dinosaur that we were talking about already, evolutionists will inevitably say, oh, the dinosaurs went extinct some 65 million years ago. They came from other creatures. In fact, some of them will say, come back to that maybe later, that some of them evolved into birds. But when we look at the scriptures and at dinosaurs, we have to realize, well, what are dinosaurs? Land-dwelling animals. The land-dwelling animals, well, they were made on day 6, right? And what else do we know? Well, they were made vegetarian, Genesis 1:30. Just like people were made vegetarian, the verse before it. Obviously, that has changed. So if you had a bacon roll this morning, don't worry, you're quite all right. But originally, there wasn't a necessity or a need or even an allowing of killing of animals, because God had made everything very good. There wasn't going to be any killing of animals. So let's think a little bit more about fossils, because that's how we learn about dinosaurs. And here you see a fossil image of what is called a Parasaurolophus. I probably put the emphasis wrong, but it's a crested herbivore. A herbivore means eating plants. And the age, supposedly, is 75 million years old. How do we know? It says on the ticket. And on the other side, it says made in China. Well, joking aside, we all know that a fossil doesn't come with a label attached to it, but sometimes in the newspapers or on the TV, it is reported almost as if it was. They found this dinosaur and it is so many million years old, as if it's a matter of fact, end of discussion, no debate, please. But we know that these things don't come with tickets. And I've already told you that the fossil itself is not under debate. There's no dispute. As long as people can make their measurements and you can compare notes, that is what we call the facts. And we call that operational science. And operational science sometimes refers to as empirical science, if you want a fancy word, or observation science. Can be done by anyone in the here and now, in the present. And you don't have to make inferences or anything. Like, you just make your measurements and you repeat it and you take notes and you compare notes. But that so-called tag or the label, the origin or the history of this fossil bone, that is where the debate is always at. And that's ultimately an interpretation of everybody involved, be it evolutionist or be it creationist. Now, I think as creationists, we have a manual or a set of instructions that gives us clues about the past, and that should be our framework, because God, as I said, was the witness who doesn't lie. But this is what sometimes people refer to as historical science. I've heard the word forensic science, and it is involving inferences and making assumptions, sometimes quite reasonable, about past events. But we weren't there, and so we need to be careful. I would say, if you build your thinking on God's word, you've got a good foundation. If you build your thinking on man's opinion, be ready to jump on and off different bandwagons, because things keep on changing in the world of evolution. So that's the two types of sciences that people need to be aware of exist. But when you read the newspaper or when you look at the news bulletin, these two sciences are mixed as if they are exactly the same. But hopefully now you understand they're not. One is in the here and now, in the present. The other one is in the past, not repeatable. So very briefly, an evolutionist interpretation of the dinosaurs. So I'm going to talk from an evolutionary perspective very briefly. And it's evolution in a nutshell. Just bear with me. There's a lot more that you could say, but I have to get home before midnight. Otherwise, I'll be a pumpkin. But the life of dinosaurs, well, they lived supposedly hundreds of millions of years ago. And during the periods they call the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And I'm going to show you here a cartoon of what they call the geologic column. And creationists and evolutionists both are quite happy that you can call it that. And these layers represent these different periods. So one of the layers is the Triassic, on top of that would be the Jurassic, on top of that would be the Cretaceous. And in these layers, sedimentary layers, you find dead creatures, that's the fossils. And so they say the lower layers were deposited before the upper layers. That's a plausible assumption, I think. You do actually have overturns of layers, so it doesn't always fly, but usually the oldest layers are at the bottom. The question is the time scale, and I'll come back to that later. But these dead things, the fossils, that's where the evolutionists would argue there is a progression from the very basic and simplistic to more complex as you go up and up through the geologic column. Now, no dinosaur fossil bones have been found in layers higher than the Cretaceous. So they say that is the last period of long time where they lived. And then they would put that at some 65 million years ago. What happened? Well, the death of the dinosaurs, they went extinct. 65, 66 is a number that you'll see sometimes. So, but what's a million years between friends? You know, depends who you ask. That's when the dinosaurs went extinct, they say. And this was an asteroid impact in the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, if you prefer, whatever, I don't care. The Yucatan Peninsula. And there is indeed evidence that there is an impact, a crater impact. So creationists don't tend to argue with the observable signs. It says, well, the time scales may be a bit different. So the asteroid impact, by the way, became popular in 1980. So it's been around now for 46 years, give or take a year or so. But prior to that, there have been many, many other ideas that were given for the extinction of the dinosaurs. Volcanoes supposedly played a role. Mammals took over from the dinosaurs. Disease has been proffered as one of the arguments. And I'll give you a quote from the Smithsonian now. And an article there was written, cataracts, slip discs, epidemics, glandular problems, and even a loss of sex drive have all been proposed as the reason non-avian dinosaurs perished. I think whoever wrote this had a bit of tongue-in-cheek, because how you can know about the sex drive of something that lived 60 odd million years ago, I don't know. So I think it was maybe having a little bit of laugh, but this is what they said. And note that word non-avian. Avian refers to birds, so they're basically saying non-bird-like dinosaurs, because that's another view that exists, that they are not extinct after all. They flit between trees. In fact, a small theropod dinosaur over millions of generations turned into flying birds. So if you went to Kentucky Fried Chicken recently, you maybe been to Kentucky Fried Dinosaur, who knows? So this actually is held by quite a lot of evolutionists that dinosaurs, or some dinosaurs, evolved into bird creatures. And well, that's their view. I disagree, but typically they will refer you to Archaeopteryx, which is a cartoon depicted there. I have to say it is a bit of a funny looking bird. I shouldn't say that word. It's a creature made by God, so it certainly was a magnificent flying creature. It had a longer bony tail, and it did have some teeth. So we don't have birds with teeth now, but there is evidence that other birds had teeth. But the conclusion in general is this is just a perching bird. This is not a dinosaur or a reptilian, it's a bird. But people within the church who read the Bible, they think, oh, we need to somehow fit dinosaurs into the Bible, because we're finding all these fossils. We believe they are real, and I'd say they are real. I've held a very big one, worked on it myself. They are not planted by God to test our faith. I've heard that view sometimes. They are generally, and it's not just dinosaurs. There's a lot of dead animals. Why would there be lots of dead animals all over the world? Well, it has something to do with the flood that happened. You can read about that in Genesis. So how do you fit dinosaurs into the Bible? Some people may wonder. The simple answer is you don't, because you don't try to squeeze anything into the Bible. You read God's word and have the word help you explain or make sense of the world that we live in. And so let's read one passage from Genesis 1:25. God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So there you have three categories: beasts, livestock, and things that creep. Things that creep. There's probably millions of species of things that creep. So this is a catch-all umbrella almost. Livestock, you can throw cows in there, sheep, horses, well, whatever animals you have on the farm perhaps. And I would say the category beasts would be a suitable one, I think, to put the dinosaurs in. It's the book of the history of the universe. It doesn't change. Isn't that good? Because, as I said earlier already, the worldview of evolution, you continuously have to adapt and know about the latest finds that sometimes don't really fit with what they previously said. So it's constantly being manipulated. One thing they know for a fact is that evolution is true in their minds, but the details are very malleable and plastic. But the Bible doesn't mention the word dinosaur, does it? Well, that's very simple, because it was Sir Richard Owen who coined the word in 1841. But the King James was summoned or commissioned in 1611. So we have there a period of well over 2 centuries, 230 years, before the word dinosaur was even invented. Incidentally, Sir Richard Owen was sort of a creationist. He had maybe a few funny views, but he was the superintendent of the Natural History Department of the British Museum, a creationist. that wouldn't happen nowadays. I can assure you. They make sure that that wouldn't happen. Well, God is able to put somebody there, but there'll be quite an uproar. Now, what's the biblical interpretation? Again, a quick overview. Non-flying reptiles that have legs and therefore are land animals. Now, why do I now say non-flying or non-avian? Because sometimes, and I'm not going to shoot anyone over this, people like to put the swimming creatures like the plesiosaur, often considered Loch Ness monster, or the ichthyosaur, which is a fish lizard that looks a bit like a dolphin but is not. And what about the pterodons and the pterodactyls, those flying reptiles? People say, well, aren't they dinosaurs too? I would say technically not really, but I'm not going to die over that and have that debate with you. You can believe so if you want, but I'm referring to the land-dwelling, air-breathing dinosaurs when I use the word dinosaur tonight. So they were created on the 6th day because that's when God made the land animals, which happens to be the same day that Adam and Eve were created. So in case you wonder, well, when you think about dinosaur, most of you probably will have T-Rex in your mind, not on the least because it was the first one I showed up at the beginning of the slide. So is Adam on the menu for the dinosaurs? Well, no, because I already said the Bible teaches that both mankind and animals were created vegetarian. And we're going to read that to every beast of the earth and to every bird of the heaven and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So God is saying there was no killing there in the original creation. So Adam and Eve were perfectly fine and safe. Then, of course, we have that flood that came some 1650 years after the creation. And that flood has a lot of explanatory power of geology things that we probably won't go into tonight. But there's some books that you can peruse and buy if you want next door when you have a cup of tea later on. But what about the dinosaurs? Did they go on the ark? Well, we believe so, and we have evidence because he survived the flood, so it must be true. Well, kidding aside, we do believe at CMI and other creation organizations that dinosaurs did go on the ark, male and female, and they did survive. Why do we believe that? Well, first of all, the ark was not as small as the dinghies that you see in many children's books. The dimensions were 135 meters long and 13.5 meters high and 22 plus meters wide. It was a very, very big ark indeed. 200 articulated lorries would have fitted if you managed to wheel them on, and each of those holding well over 300 sheep. So there was lots and lots of space. And here you see a model, what the ark could have looked like. And on the bottom right there, you see two people to scale on that ark. It was indeed huge, nothing like these kind of pictures where you have a dozen or so animals. Usually the giraffe sticks out of the chimney, not in this case, but it's chock-a-block. But this is not helpful, I think. I understand, I have a 7-year-old. I understand children like cute and fluffy and all the rest of it, but it's not biblical. And even for adults and children, images stick with us better than a list of dimensions that I've given you up there. And so when we see these pictures, that kind of gets ingrained. And one of our guest speakers, he lives in Northern Ireland. He's had a class of children, primary age children. And he said, here's pencils, here's paper, draw me a picture of Noah's Ark. Almost all of them drew something like that. But two exceptions, and those two exceptions were taught biblical dimensions and biblical perspectives. They drew a massive size ark, but the vast majority of their peers drew dinghies that would roll over with the first serious wave that would come in. So it does matter. Here we have a picture of what is a real ark. I'm not sure if the man standing next to it there is Johan Huibers, but it's a fellow countryman of mine who built that ark. I've seen it a year and a half ago. It's still lying there in near Rotterdam. And it's big. He built first half-scale size, which he sold off. It was taken over to Ipswich. I'm not sure if that one is still there. But then he built a 1-to-1 size according to the biblical dimensions. And so he's now sold that off. And there's somebody who's remortgaged their home to buy it and make it into some sort of theme park again. which it was for a while. But anyway, what about the dinosaurs then? Well, dinosaurs are reptilian creatures. We already learned they're called terrible lizards. So what do many reptiles do? Many reptiles continue to grow as they age. If you think about the Galapagos documentary where the tortoises are, they show you some of these, the really big ones. They're actually the really old ones. How do we know? Well, we know that tortoises and turtles and every creature that you can think of start really small. So those tortoises that are huge came out of an egg, very small. And so God, who is very clever indeed, wouldn't have sent the biggest T-Rex and the biggest sauropod that he could find. He would have sent juveniles. Why? Well, they're smaller, therefore they need less food, and they are fitter. What do I mean with fitter? What was the purpose of Noah's flood? To start again after the flood was over, which means repopulate, procreate. With all due respect, are you going to send Granny and Grandpa Dinosaur to do that? Or are you going to send young ones that are still going through puberty and all the rest of it? Of course, God knew what he was doing. And dinosaurs started small as well. You have dinosaurs as big as the sauropods, huge, but dinosaurs went as small as chicken size and all sorts in between. There was a wide variety of dinosaurs, but they all came from eggs. And we find fossilized dinosaur eggs. About the biggest one is about 60 centimeters, or if you're imperial, 2 feet long. They're not footballs, they're more like a rugby ball. And I think that the Six Nations is long enough ago now that we can talk rugby again. Scotland nearly won it there, had they not been beaten by Italy, of all teams in the first round. Anyway, I digress. Eggs, I'm not saying, by the way, that God rolled eggs to Noah and his family. I'm saying he sent walking juveniles, just to show you that even the biggest of biggest dinosaurs started really small, just like you started about 1/10 of a millimeter, a fertilized egg. All creatures start really small and then they grow. They metabolize and they grow. All right, so just see if you've been paying attention to the presentation. Here's a question. Not going to make you raise hand, but you can answer inside your own head. This is a T-Rex, or a picture of it at least. It had teeth up to 15 centimeters long. How would this dinosaur originally have been described? So there's going to be 4 answers. 4, I can't count yet, 4. A, as a plant eater. B, a meat eater. C, a scavenger. So basically that's just, it eats whatever it finds, roadkill, whatever is available, or perhaps a combination of a plant and meat eater. Now, I'll let the clock tick away while you think a bit about that, but hopefully in your mind, you're thinking answer A, because if there was young people in the room, I would really speak to them now. When you do a test or an exam, first read and understand the question before you even begin to think about answering it. Because the word originally is the key word in this question. Yes, I do believe that T-Rex would have eaten meat later on, but originally, as I said, God said the animals and the people were vegetarians, and it was so, the Bible says. So originally, they would have been plant eaters. Later, that changed. Now, we have texts in the Bible that we believe refer to dinosaurs. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite a lengthy text, but you can look this up tonight or some other time. In Job 40. We have the behemoth. And one of the key verses that I like to point to is it has a tail like a cedar tree. So, oh, what happened there? That disappeared. It shouldn't happen. Tail like a cedar tree. So we have a cartoonist that made some pictures. This is not a cedar tree, but it's a tail. And you have Bibles that have footnotes, which are, by the way, not inspired, may I add, that say, well, it could have been an elephant. So we drew an elephant on it, and that looked a bit puzzling there. Other notes may say it could be a hippopotamus. Again, when you put a hippo on it, it doesn't look natural. If you've been to a zoo, you will have seen a hippo and an elephant. They have tails, but they're very teeny tiny. Nothing like a cedar tree, which can grow up to about 30 meters or so. So a significant tree. We think it's more likely to be a sauropod dinosaur. And the sauropod dinosaurs, we now know, they don't actually drag their tails over the ground. They're off the ground, offsetting their long neck, which would be more or less equally heavy. So it's a lever like that. And the sinews and the muscles of that tail would be connected to its hip bone. So every time this big dinosaur would take a step, it would kind of sway that cedar tree, not literally, its tail behind him as if it were a tree swaying in the wind. It was called the chief, or the biggest in the works of God. Perhaps it was indeed standing tall, one of the largest land animals there is. I think it is. And these could stand on their rear legs. That the fact that this creature, which is described as a vegetarian in verses 15 and 20, we do find evidence that sauropods, like in the picture, were indeed vegetarian. How? We have found, when I say we, scientists have found grass in coprolite. Coprolite is a word that literally means dung stone, or essentially fossilized poo. Now, if I had some people of my daughter's age, that would get a giggle or two, but you're all very mature, so we can move on from that now. So here's a comment about grass findings in dinosaur droppings. We may, and I put the bold there myself on emphasis, we may have to add grass to the dioramas of dinosaurs we see in museums. What do I mean with that? Well, first of all, let's look at the date that this was written in November 2005. So it goes back already 20 years. Now, I've got an American colleague. He's been to some museums in America, taking some pictures of some of the plaques that you see with the dioramas, the displays. And notice there on the left, alive at the time of the dinosaurs. And then drop down to the last line. But grasses and flowering plants did not yet exist. And another sign in a different museum there is that grasses did not yet exist in the time of the dinosaurs. Grasses were believed, well, they were believed to be evolving about 30 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct. However, we've learned that grass has been found in dinosaur poo, so you can't have grass in your poo if grass doesn't exist until 30 million later. So it must have been the same. What's interesting is that these pictures were taken in 2019, and the one in Atlanta, he wasn't sure of the year, but it was certainly the 20-teens. Years after somebody already said, we may have to update our dioramas, our museum displays. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't changed these on purpose. It might be very well neglect. What I'm trying to say is, not everything that you read at the museums is technically correct. And it could be on purpose, it could be accidental, but just beware of that. If you take families around or students or whatever it is, all these things come from a person that has a worldview, and that worldview might not be the same as the biblical worldview. Be aware of that. So, this dragons of legend that I mentioned way at the beginning, did we just grasp it out of thin air? No, there is a Hebrew word tanin and another word tanoth, that the King James actually translates frequently as dragon. And I think that the King James here has got it right. More modern translations have translated as jackal. But if you read it all in context, it doesn't seem to fit in most of the cases, whereas dragon or dinosaur seems to fit a lot better with some of these verses. So that happens nearly 30 times for the word tanin. And here's a skull of a dinosaur. Oh, yeah, there it is. This is Dracorex hogwartsia. So that's a fossil of a dinosaur skull. But the sign in the museum in Minneapolis says, is it a dragon or a dinosaur? That's literally what the sign says. I'll leave you to judge it, but we have artist impression of books that I don't have with me now, but we have on our website. And here's that artist impression. Is that a dragon or a dinosaur? I think it's both. It's the same thing, isn't it? Well, to my mind anyway. And dragons is something that have been reported all over the world. And I'm going to briefly mention to you George and the Dragon, which I'm sure you will have all heard of. I'm not going to say whether that George and the Dragon legend is true, by the way. I just want to look at art with you for 2 minutes. And here you see a painting that you can find in a castle in my country, the Netherlands. It's from approximately 1440 AD. George on a stallion, damsel in distress in the background, And I, as one who cannot draw for Britain or Netherlands, I think, wow, this artist knows how to draw a horse, a man, and a woman. The person who did this is competent. We can all recognize these creatures immediately. But what about this one here on the bottom left that is getting pierced with his spear? Do we think that the artist was competent enough to draw that creature accurately? I think so, because we've already seen the rest of the picture is pretty good. So some people have suggested yes, and they think it may have been a Solophysis boreae, a small theropod dinosaur. Now, another piece of art, even more stunning, I think, from 1600, you can find this in Barcelona, Spain. And you have the same scene, man on his horse, damsel in distress, beautifully represented. Very competent artist. So I think that the artist will have seen the creature themselves, or maybe have had very accurate descriptions by an eyewitness. And some people have suggested that this may have been an Orthosaurus. I'll leave you to make up your own mind. But are we saying then that dinosaurs and people were living together? Yes, we are. But which ones? And I'm a bit lateral here, a bit tangential here. The meat-eating ones or the friendly ones that make signs and do friendly protests, peaceful protests, I guess is the word to say nowadays. When we say the word together, what do you mean? What do you think of initially? It actually can depend on the context, because we're all together in this room, which could be in the same place, but also in the same time. I'm saying that dinosaurs and man did live together, i.e. at the same time. They both were created on day 6 for starters, but I think that we also live together with lions and sharks and crocodiles. Fortunately not here in Bath, but we are contemporaneous with them, but they have their own habitats, usually far away from people, and we have our own habitats. So coming back to the geological column that I introduced you before, here you see a different depiction of it on the right. I think that we're talking about the same time that all these creatures live, but at different places. So unlike evolutionists who would say, no, these are wildly different time periods, and you see a progression from simple to more complex, creationists would say, no, these are all contemporaneous. That means living at the very same time. They just live in different places, just like we have creatures now. And so we have a diagram here where you can see the habitats of different creatures. And if you were to have a global flood, which were the creatures that would have been buried the soonest, the first, and therefore the deepest? It would have been the ones that are already at the bottom, the ocean dwellers, the bottom dwellers, shells and clams. Is it any wonder that 95% of the fossil record is precisely that, bottom dwellers and shells and clams-like things? Because A, they're at the bottom, and B, they can't really escape very fast anywhere. And then as you make your way through the picture, you can follow the numbers, you get into the less deep seas, you get onto the land, and then in the top right there, you find mammals and people. It's people. I believe we actually don't have any fossils from before the flood. You can ask me about human fossils in the questions afterwards. But wouldn't you say that people made in God's image would have been the cleverest, the smartest of all the creatures that God has made, and therefore would survive the longest? Because why? They would run to higher ground. They would maybe jump in the boat if they lived near the water, or they would cling to floating trees for as long as they could possibly do, and therefore they would be the last to drown. That's why I think there is no fossils found of them. But what about the dinosaurs then? Surely, with so many people reporting 65, 66 million years ago, it must be true, because isn't the majority always right? Well, that's a fallacy. The majority is not always right. But here's a good argument that dinosaurs didn't live millions of years ago. And what we see here is soft tissue. I'm going to have to get a bit of a move on. On the left, blood vessels. On the right, blood cells. And these came from a T-Rex dinosaur bone, which people who found them believe were 65 million years old. And surely organic biomolecules don't last that long. And I would say they don't. But what are the explanations that people have given for these finds? Because Mary Schweitzer and her team did that experiment, 17 repeat experiments, so 18 in total, before they published about it. They were so insecure because they thought this is going to cause a riot. This is very controversial because everybody up to that point, most people up to that point thought, no, when you find a dinosaur fossil, it's completely stone. There's nothing there that's organic. But she found that, and she wanted to be sure. So some people say, no, it's something else. You've mistakenly identified this as blood cells or blood vessels. Others say it's from somewhere else, contamination perhaps. And others say, no, therefore, well, it must preserve that long because we surely found it in the dinosaur bone. So it must be 65 or older, a million years older. I would say all of these are wrong. I have a different view. But some people have suggested when it's something else, it's biofilm, that didn't last very long. Why? Because you can just look through a microscope if you are a scientist and you studied a bit of biology. That's not biofilm. It's very clearly blood cells. It doesn't really take a PhD even to do that. Others have said it's contamination. I have a lot more time for that. But essentially, you're criticizing the scientists like Mary Schweitzer and her team for not doing their experiments carefully. So that's operational science that can be fought out. Early 1990s claim, it says in the Royal Society B, of DNA recovered from million-year-old fossils are now widely regarded as modern contaminants, and people still write about these things. But I would say I reject it because there's been a lot of good research going on that keeps finding biomolecules. Maybe the contamination happened in the unobserved past. I'm totally open to that. As we learned from Job 38, we weren't there, neither were the evolutionists. Who knows what happened in those burial settings and stuff. So there is something to it, so we shouldn't be too dismissive immediately. But then there's the Mary Schweitzers who are convinced, no, it's not contamination. We have identified it correctly. Therefore, DNA, proteins, and all sorts of things must preserve that long because there it is. But they're now criticizing the people who have done decay projects or decay experiments to show biological molecules, they don't last. They decay over time, and these have been published as well. So are they wrong now? In a bone, at an ideal preservation temperature of minus 5 degrees centigrade, effectively every nucleotide, that's DNA bond, would be destroyed after a maximum of 6.8 million years. That's not saying that they are 6.8 million. That's the absolute top. That's a cap, if you like. This is a bone at ideal preservation of minus 5 degrees. So that's kind of like freezer temperatures almost. Well, do we think that dinosaurs lived at freezer temperatures? No, they lived probably in tropical or subtropical temperatures, 20, 25, 30 degrees. So how did these things keep intact for supposedly 65 and more million of years when the scientific experiments show there's no way, even if you have optimal preservation settings? So reject that. Now, you can always have blind faith about the unobserved past. Everybody supposedly is free to believe what they want. So you can believe that these things somehow, in a way, must have lasted that long. But you now stepped out of the realm of experimental science and you're now into ideology, paradigms, worldviews, beliefs, which is fine, but don't call it science then. So this is Matthew Collins. I've corresponded a little bit with him. And he asked the question, can iron, which was a favorite for preservation of these kind of biomolecules, preserve tissue and proteins for millions of years? And he wrote in 2 different articles, I have yet to hear a plausible explanation for how soft tissues can be preserved for this long. For me, they're defying basic chemistry and physics. Iron may slow down the decay process, but it's not clear how it could be arrested or stopped altogether. Proteins decay in an orderly fashion. We can slow it down, not by a lot. So people who say that these things must preserve that long, he says they are defying basic chemistry and physics. The experiments have been done. These things decay, they fall apart, they get destroyed over time. So, question to ask is, why is there so much confusion among evolutionists themselves? Not even brought the creationists into this equation. Well, I think Günter Bechley sums it up very nice. How can scientists have so different views with regards to an observed phenomenon? The answer is that there is no unbiased study of raw data, but always an interpretational perspective involved in the analysis. Those are the glasses that I mentioned to you earlier with the lenses. It's always a worldview that will interpret a set of data. Now, why do evolutionists have different views than creationists? Because creationists have a completely different set of glasses, a completely different starting point. We will say, yeah, we accept that these are blood vessels and blood cells. From a T-Rex, sure, there was tons of people that were witnessing it when the bone was sawed open because it couldn't be lifted by the helicopter. And the experiments were done by groups of people. 65 million years? No, we would suggest it's closer to 4,500 years because that's how long ago it was when Noah's flood happened. So how do you depict this? All these last 5 or 6 slides in a summary. Here you have 2 evolutionists arguing. Collins, I keep hanging my head, I'm missing. Collins on the left, who says, it's something else. It's not millions of years old. Can't be. Things decay. And Schweitzer, on the other hand, says, but it is original. I got it out of the bone with my techies. Therefore, it must be millions of years old. Friends, may I suggest there is a different way of looking at it? That it is original, we believe you, but it's only thousands of years old. Noah's flood time, which would have killed, drowned these animals, quickly deposit them in layers very quickly. Anyway, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to do my last 2 examples. And these are now living fossils. So enough of the death of things. Living fossils. We're going to start with a coelacanth, which is a swimming fish that looks like this. And they say it lived hundreds of millions of years ago. It became extinct at the time when the dinosaurs too went extinct. Because there's no fossils in the same layers that are the top layers, the higher layers where we find human fossils. They are found in the layers where we find dinosaur fossils. However, they were found alive off the coast of Madagascar, which is that island on the right of Africa. So they compared the living creature, the living coelacanth, with the fossils that they had. And they found that they look exactly alike. No evolution of 66 million years happening there. They are just the same looking. So applying to what we have learned at the beginning about operational and historical science, let's apply that to these statements here. It became extinct 66 million years ago. No, because they were found alive. Yes, true. And they've been found near Indonesia since as well. The fact that they look just like the fossils, true, as people looking and comparing can be done. It is true, though, that no fossils are found in the same layers as humans, but they are found in the same layers as dinosaur fossils. But that is not millions of years, that's just different habitats. So what about the one with the magnifying glass? Lived hundreds of millions of years ago. I would reject that. There's no need for that because they are alive today. There's no sign of evolution of 60 odd million years ago. One more, the Wollemi pine. It's a plant or little tree that looks like this, lived supposedly from 90 million years ago, went extinct some 2 million years ago. This era is overlapping with the dinosaurs in their minds, and it's now been found alive in Down Under, which is not there, it's upside down, there it is. And it just looks like the fossils. In fact, I found a website where you can buy some of these. You have to fork out a good bit of money. They're not cheap, I think, but they are alive and breathing and kicking, and you can buy them. So let's apply what we've learned. Oh, sorry, it's called a dinosaur tree because supposedly it's so old. Became extinct 2 million years ago? No, because they're alive in Australia. Does it look just like the fossils? Yeah, because you can observe it. Now, what about these other 2 magnifying glasses here? Lived from 90 million years ago? No need to believe that. Just believe that it was created on the 3rd day, I should say now, a few days before man and dinosaurs were created. But the era overlaps with dinosaurs? Yes or no? Well, yes, because the plants were made on day 3, the dinosaurs 3 days later, they both lived on for a period of time. In fact, until very recently, Wollemac pine is still alive today. And the dinosaurs, well, we think that most of them went extinct in the flood. Some lived on. You can ask me about it later. So these are examples, and there's books full of living fossils that people have said, these were extinct for millions of years. They're alive. They look just like the fossils. No sign of evolution whatsoever. There is no need for the millions of years. So some conclusions. Dinosaurs did really live. Once a lady came to me, what was it? The dragons. Oh, Satan was the dragon. So that's, I think now Satan was, well, he is called a dragon, but he's not a dinosaur. But that was a funny one. They really lived. And most of the fossils that we find of them were made in the flood. Birds are not evolved dinosaurs. We believe that birds are completely distinct kinds than dinosaurs. Birds, day 5, dinosaurs, day 6. People have seen dinosaurs, we maybe call them dragons, and the Bible supports this. The King James does a good rendition of that, of the word tannin, and then you have the description in Job 40 as well of the behemoth. The soft tissue is strong evidence, very strong evidence, a growing piece of evidence that dinosaur fossils are not millions of years old, but only thousands. And we have an article on our website. You can look up Age of the Earth, 101 evidences the Earth is young or not old. And the 101 evidences in the top 10, I think there's 3 of them that have to do with soft tissue. And most of them reference secular journals and articles. So it's using their publications, the ones that they like to show that the world is not millions of years old. Living fossils suggest that it's only been thousands of years since Noah's flood. And lastly, some people will just about believe anything as long as it does not support the Bible. And you can see that now in this day and age where, well, I can do a talk on that as well, where apparently a man can be a woman and vice versa. And there's not just the male and female that God created, but apparently 98 more. Anyway, I digress. Just one final thing for those who are old enough to know Inspector Columbo. Probably most of us, I suspect. I've shared with you that we believe that dinosaurs and dragons are 2 different words for the same being. We have another example of that in the Bible. Can you guess? Well, we've got, of course, behold the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but also John saying, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. I don't know all of you, and I can't even presume that in all my audiences, everybody that comes is a Christian, a follower of Christ. So we always have a little gospel message in. Even if you reject everything I said about dinosaurs, the millions of years, the most important thing for you to do is become related to this being, Christ, the Messiah, who is referred to as a lion, but also as a lamb. Because that's the most important decision you can make in your entire life. And then we can hash out all the details in eternity by talking about it with the Creator himself, perhaps. So I've come to the end of my presentation. I want to do a few plugs. And one of them is the magazine. Like I said, we like to connect. We can come back every week or every month. So the magazine is something that comes out quarterly, full color for the family. So it's not a technical journal. Some articles are maybe a wee bit more difficult, but this is really family orientated. So short articles that you can read in a minute. We have several pages of those. This is news bulletins that came out in the last few months. Always stuff on animals, hybrids. We've got blue jays, green jays. They can have little baby jays. I wrote a little article about cousin marriage. That was a thing debated in Westminster not that long ago. It had to do with, this article is to do with Born in Bradford. And well, there's a lot of political stuff behind this as well. So you can read it if you want. We have interviews with scientists. Mark Surtees from Scotland, PhD scientist. We have ideas that are sometimes ridiculed by evolutionists. Mike Ord came with the distribution of animals after the flood, because there was massive floating lock mats that were so big that bigger animals could quite happily jump on them and be rafted across seas and oceans. And the evolutionists had a field day. They laughed at the creationists. What a bunch of morons they were. Until 2 years ago or so, maybe 3 now, the evolutionists said, Actually, that's a very good idea. We're going to write about that as well now. So I can just say, you heard it here first, the creationists had that before. We get testimonies from people that for them, the magazine is of foundational importance. There's a few, but I want to read one that's from Pastor Marty. Jacob became a Christian on the back of the magazine. Every magazine has a gospel message, by the way. But I want to read this from Hungary. I've been following Jesus for 3 years, but until now, I never believed the first pages of the Bible. Since reading the Hungarian Creation magazine, I believe the entire scriptures. Hallelujah. That is a blessing. And I hope that you can also believe that, no, the Bible doesn't start with Abraham. It starts in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. You can get digital. This is the form that I'm going to pass around. I mustn't forget. If you sign up and pay with me tonight over a cup of tea, that's great. I'll give you a back issue extra. I'll give you a set of bookmarks to take away with, because you need to have 6 books on the go any one time, just saying. I'll give you a book called Evolutionists Say the Other Things. That's a quote book. So all of these things you get for signing up for a year. If you do 2 or 3 years, you can also pick a DVD. There's a few choices there. If you don't have a DVD player, we can send you an MP4. The Answers book has chapters on the age of the earth, dinosaurs. I've got a few children's books. If you've got little ones in the age bracket of 6 to 12 thereabouts, you can read it to them, with them, rhyming. This is by Philip, my boss. Nicely illustrated. Have a look. Thank you for your attention. I've talked a lot, and I was going to give these one, wasn't I? So again, yeah, you can put your name down. You don't have to. This is paid for, so if you do sign up, come and see me. But feel free to pass it on to your neighbor. But I'd like to open if there's any questions on dinosaurs or other creation-related topics. Feel free to ask me now. Yes, sure.
So the flood, made all these different layers.
Yeah. So layers are formed by sedimentary-laden waters that flow, and there's been operational science or observable science. Basically big flumes with floating water with lots of sediments in them, and they have cameras recording that layers are being formed. So you have to have floating water with particles in them, and then it has to do with mobility and size of the particles, how the layers form. But yes, you're quite right, flowing water lays down water, and we agree with evolutionists, people that believe in the millions of years, that most of the layers that you find all around the world, when you drive on some motorways, you see the outcrops laid down by flowing water. The difference is the time scales. We say these layers were from Noah's flood, about a year. They say, oh, these go back millions and millions of years. But we both believe flowing water deposited layers, yes. Yeah, no, I'll remember, yeah. So, no, yeah. Yeah. Go for your follow-up question.
Go on, then. So how come we haven't got like T-Rexes and walking around today?
That's a very good question, yeah. So I haven't seen a dinosaur lately. I don't know about you, but so we believe that went on the ark. Probably about 50 different kinds. Not every species had to be represented, just every kind, male and female. That's another thing that people now argue about. But yes, you do need a male and a female. So they came off the ark. They would have procreated, but I do think after the flood, everything had changed. There wouldn't be as an abundance of vegetation growing. Everything was young and fresh and small. So I think the dinosaurs, especially the bigger ones, would have struggled to eat. I think that maybe some of them thought, hey, I see a nice little allotment where these funny bipedal things are walking. I'm going to have some of that. Or these human beings, they have sheep and horses and cows. I like some of that if I'm a meat eater. And maybe the people were defending their allotments and their animals and killing the dinosaurs. Perhaps they were thinking, if I shoot that or kill that, that's food for another month or two. So, and we read of Nimrod. He was a hunter before the Lord, or maybe a hunter against the Lord. And so maybe there was some prowess, some kudos if you were to kill a big T-Rex. So I think the dinosaurs did live on, but maybe more than other animals struggled and didn't quite procreate. Now we read about species going extinct all the time. So dinosaur species will have gone extinct as well. That's nothing shocking. It's just a shame because the dinosaurs speak to the imagination, and we would have loved to maybe seen one. Maybe not in a dark alley in the middle of the night if it's a T-Rex, but so we don't have one silver bullet like that's it. And you might think, well, the evolutionists, oh, they have their asteroid, that's it. But remember, they had lots of other ideas prior, and there's now many articles starting to appear in the last 5 years or so, where people are saying, well, actually, the dinosaurs were in decline even before the asteroid hit. How they know that? Well, you have to look at the papers, what stories they tell. So, but they're now even starting to say, well, maybe the asteroid wasn't the whole story. So, hopefully that helps a bit. Have a look at the Creation Answers book. There's a whole chapter about dinosaurs. Even if you don't buy it, you might have a flick through. So, yeah, in the back.
I'm glad you mentioned the asteroid because I was thinking about that during the thing, but then I forgot for a question. But what do you think? How do we know when that asteroid hit historically, and where do you think that ties into any events in the Bible?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Where was the asteroid?
So, first of all, I would say we don't know for a fact because none of us observed it there. We believe it hit at some point because the impact crater is there. The evolutionists would say, well, there's I forget the element now, is it iodium? No, something with an I. They said that that's associated with comets and cosmological rocks hitting. But also, that element, which I've now forgotten the name of, is also associated with volcanoes erupting. And we think that volcanoes erupted fountains of the deep around Noah's time. And so they would have spread, was it iridium, maybe it was, a fine layer of that around the world. So, yes, you can find them on asteroids, but also volcanoes have it. So, there's different ideas when it comes to impacts. Mike Ord is probably the guy to read about. He thinks that maybe they kicked off or started the flood. There was an impact. There's also people that believe there were impacts at the time of creation. Our moon obviously has been hit. And so there's different models and ideas. The whole idea with creation is doing it is their models are put below scripture. If the model clashes with scripture, then their model is not right. And it needs to be rejected or amended. But scripture always has the higher viewpoint. And so it's good to have ideas and to make models as long as it's subject to scripture. So I think what the argument I'm saying here is quite a few people of the creation movement think it was probably around the time of the flood. And it would have been maybe a bit more towards the end, otherwise it would maybe not be found, don't know. But there's articles on our website and some of them are fairly technical. I'm sure you can find a lot of them. So tonight at midnight when you're bored, you can have a little search. Creation.com is our website, by the way, and there's a search box. Just put in an asteroid and I'm sure you'll get 10, 20, 30 hits. Yeah.
With what you said earlier about grasses being found in dinosaur dung fossils, has that caused evolutionists who look at plant evolution, has that caused any of them to start having to reconsider their ideas that plants that reproduce sexually came after those earlier plants that were vegetative? And have they had to reconsider that, and have they come up with any, clever excuses?
Well, I can't speak for all of them. There will have been some people that would have scratched their head seriously, but this happens quite often, that something is discovered that doesn't quite fit with their story, and they simply just shuffle some dates and rearrange the story a bit so that then all of a sudden it does fit, and then that's now the new story. And that's why I said you almost have to continuously read up with how dates are, and you get stories that shift 30 million is very little in their time scales. But I've written an article where there was 3 examples. I think it's actually called What's a Billion Years Between Friends, where they had a date is like, oh, that needs to be shifted by 1 billion years now because of this find. It doesn't really seem to matter. It's so plastic. It's the one thing that they know for sure is that evolution is true one way or the other, and we just have to. I'm just glad that my thinking is based on God's word, because I don't have to continuously learn something new. That would be exhausting. But I'm sure there would have been some people that would have frowned, hang on, that doesn't fit. Maybe someone was, maybe our story is wrong. I think the majority probably will have adapted and fitted in and just went on with it. But I don't know everyone, so. Yeah, in the back.
Often heard the objection about fossils taking a very, very long time to form.
Yeah, my friends and colleagues in America, they know a guy that can make a fossil for you in a day. Lots of heat and pressure, and if you provide the creature that you want fossilized, I'd suggest a dead one, not a living one. That would be cruel. But yeah, so this guy, he actually makes quite beautiful fossils, and he does it in a day. So it's the circumstances, pressure and heat are key, that play a big role. Time is not of the essence. So yeah, and they've made oil in I don't know exact time scale. They've made opal in short time scales. They can artificially do this now. So they're finding like, oh, all these things, they don't need the long periods of time. We can make them quick. So if the circumstances were like what we've reproduced here, well, maybe the million years are not needed at all then. I would say correct. Did you have a question? No? Yeah, you?
Okay.
Well, anyone?
I was wondering about whales during the flood. How come they perhaps survived and other large...
The answer is, during the flood there would have been tons of water for any aquatic creature to swim in, and the follow-up usually is, but you've got saltwater creatures and you've got freshwater creatures. You've got natural separation. Saltier water is denser, so it would settle lower. Fresher water would flow on top. But you've got creatures that can live in both. Most creatures have a spectrum or a range for certain things, just like humans. We can quite happily live in temperatures from -10 to +20, and I'm being very cautious. It probably is a lot wider. North of Scotland, -20, probably possible. 30 degrees in London in between all. So a lot of creatures have a range, and so they would fish. Everything would just swimming. Noah didn't need to take aquatic creatures, just land-dwelling, air-breathing animals and the birds. So.
How many years since when dinosaurs were first made by God to when did they die out and become extinct?
Yeah, so we think that some dinosaurs have lived maybe even into the last few centuries. And so I'm ashamed that I didn't bring that book, excuse me, Dire Dragons, where there seems to be evidence that people have seen dinosaurs in recent, when I say recent, century history. But I think they've been slowly fading out. And sorry, Kenny, I have to give this away. I don't think there is a plesiosaur in Loch Ness. But there might be. So you may have to go to Scotland with all your money and buy lots of iron brew and see if you can spot Nessie. But so I think that they are truly extinct now, but it wasn't long ago that they really died out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the so even you have Jurassic Park at the beginning, and from the beginning to the end film, they're trying to explain how the dinosaurs, because of a different view of whether they had fur or feathers or whatever else, and the their view of what dinosaurs are is not static. Is there any sense that as that shifts, that is coming closer to what were sort of regarded as legendary accounts of dragons and the like, or is that not really sort of on that?
Sorry, do you mean the concept of the film to bring dinosaurs
Well,
back?
so
Or?
the film has a continuity problem because what dinosaurs are now believed to
Oh.
be like is not the same as in 1990 when I was a kid, effectively.
Yeah, no,
You have to
you,
explain where have the feathers gone or whatever else.
yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay, so this is the problem with a lot of science, not just on historical, but you have to believe what we know now.
Yeah.
And now we are for sure. Now we really got it right. Yeah, but you said that 20 years ago as well, and you said it 50 years ago as well. And so we have to believe the current thing. That's why I say build your thinking on God's word, because it's the reliable one. But yeah, you mentioned feathers. I'm not so sure if dinosaurs had feathers. The same guy that I mentioned earlier, I think, about the children's class drawing the Noah's Ark, he wrote an article about how many feathers did you find, and you can find it on our website. They made a big article about they found dinosaur feathers, but they actually didn't find any feathers. It was just inferred and speculation, and the whole feather thing seems to be more like it's frayed collagen fibers that are interpreted and therefore misidentified as supposedly feathers. So I'm not so sure if dinosaurs had feathers at all, but even if they did, God could do that, but I'm not so sure. But they would have to. Yeah, the story may have had to. I've seen only 2 of the whole series, I think. So I don't know what they've done. Have they made them with dinosaurs with feathers?
Don't bother with the rest.
No. Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, and it also says, won't God look after your feathered friends? Like, of course he'll look after you. So if dinosaurs were birds, they're no longer here. So.
Well, if dinosaurs became birds, then I suppose you could call them birds or dinosaurs. But I think.
So that kind of matches.
Well, but that didn't happen because God made distinct creatures that procreate within limits. They have offspring as themselves. It will procreate after their kind. It says that 10 times in Genesis 1. So, you had dinosaurs made by God on day 6, birds on day 5, swimming creatures on day 5, and they reproduce within their kind, within limits, with variation, but there's borders. There's no. You can't extrapolate any change all the way to whatever you want it to be. And that's what the evolutionists want us to believe, that one thing can change into a completely different thing. That's not what the Bible teaches. So, yeah. Shall we have a cup of tea, people? The leaflets that are on the benches you can keep. It's free, and come and have a chat if you want, or a cuppa. And I'll pack this away. I'll be through in a minute or 2. Can you find the clipboards and bring them through, Kenny, if you're be so kind?